This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. And happy Wednesday to Heat fans and Heat fans only. That's kind of a Twitter thing, that's inside joke there. Ira Winderman, Clay Ferraro to take you through the next hour of the show. A lot of Heat talk, a lot of NBA talk, because I want to kind of put the Heat in the context of what we're seeing throughout the league. But Ira, you were with the Heat on this most recent road trip. I want to get your take on kind of what we've seen. I also want to get your take on some of the injuries that the Heat have suffered at this point in the season, because I think, the question isn't whether or not these guys can play in these games so much as, is it prudent to play them? Because I know that's the word that you like to use, prudent. Like, does it make sense to kind of put them through the rigors if indeed they're fighting stuff? So a lot to get to on this show, but I do want to start with the road trip that we just saw with this team. And I mentioned this during the crossover. If you joined us last week, my take on this road trip was, and this was after the Denver loss, and it was leading to the Lakers game. My take on the road trip was you'd feel okay about this team if they were able to emerge 2-3. And Ira, you've used the term treading water. Pat Riley said over and over again before the season started that this beginning part of the season was a gauntlet. It was as long as you can get through it and feel good about your team, then I think that you have to feel good about the outlook for the season. And Ira, I think they've done just that. My impression of going 2-3 and you feel okay with it, that was before Jimmy Butler got hurt. That was before Duncan Robinson inexplicably forgot how to make a layup and make a free throw, and it cost them badly. And it was before the debacle at the end of the Lakers game, and there were some officiating issues there as well. Not making excuses, but I kind of felt like the Lakers game and the Thunder game were, I don't want to call them must wins, but if you were going to win games, they were the most likely wins. You blow the Lakers game, but you make up for it with the Jazz win. So Ira, when you combine everything that happened between the injuries, blowing that Lakers game, and ultimately rebounding to win the games in Utah and win OKC, I feel pretty good about things. Not just okay, I feel pretty good moving forward. They were able to navigate that, and they're still treading water.
Yeah, Clay, I think the only concerns you have is when you have a blowout loss and you have no clue and no answer. And the Heat have not had a lot of those. Certainly the Boston game before the trip was one of those games, and certainly the game in Denver. Forget about what happened. We discussed last week on Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint about the Markieff Morris, Nikola Jokic thing. But let's face it, for the first 45 minutes of that game, they were terrible. So that was a bad loss. Then you move on to the Lakers. Look, say what you want, but they got to overtime. They played a competitive game, albeit the Lakers not the same team without LeBron. Next night against the Clippers, built a big early lead. Second night of a back-to-back, they wilted a little. As long as you're competitive, you can just say, okay, if we just did one more thing in the Lakers game, one more thing in the Clippers game, all of a sudden you're talking 4-1. It's like, wow, that's a great trip. Mm-hmm. So I think like Eric Spoelstra said, those are learning experiences. If we get in that situation again, if we're up 9 in the midway through the fourth quarter against the Lakers, how do we close it out? When we get the big lead against the Clippers, how do we close it out? And you learn from them. Is it optimal to wind up being 2-3? No. 3-2 would have been okay, wouldn't have been great. But I think you come back from that and you could say, you know what? We didn't have Jimmy Butler for the last 1, 2, 3.5 games, 3 3/4 games of the trip, and they still stayed afloat. They got Max Strus back into the mix. They found some other things about other players. Duncan Robinson found his shot certainly in those last 2 games against the Jazz and against the Thunder. So they're finding themselves a little more. Got to make hay now in these next 2. We'll talk about the upcoming schedule toward the end of the show and then go back out on the road. Not nearly as tough a competition on this upcoming road trip. So you sort of just see where you are, you feel things out, and like you pointed out, you play it safe with the injuries because you don't want the minor nagging injury that has guys listed as questionable become the major injury where they wind up being listed as doubtful or being listed as out.
Hitting the comments here. And by the way, guys, thanks for doing this. Thanks for hitting up the chat here. We like to make this interactive. And also, please make sure that you hit the like button. That does us a big favor moving forward. Hawaiian Punch, appreciate that. Jaime, welcome aboard. Daniel asks, 1 to 10, 1 being bad, 10 being great. how would you rate this West Coast trip? So I'll leave that open for you, Ira, to kind of answer that. 1 to 10, what were you rated?
I give it a 5, which really for a losing trip is not that bad. You think, I mean, it's kind of easy to do the math on that. You had a 5-game trip, you lost, you only won 2 games. That should probably be a 4, just based on your sliding scale there. But I think because of the injuries, it mitigated it, because the compactness of the trip with the back-to-back set and all those games coming in order. So I think all things in order. I think Heat fans have a good perspective. And Clay, I spoke about this at the start of the season when they were going good, is you want to build some equity. You want to have some things left there. So when you hit a slide, you're not starting at 1-7 and it just seems worse and worse. And you're looking at the schedule. When do they get to 500? When can they get back in contention? They've stayed where they are. They have the games against Washington, showdowns for first place for all we know. So they can be right back at the top of the standings. It is early. You want to know who you are. Also, Clay, you want to know who you aren't and where you need to improve also, and they have a window into that. So I think if nothing else, Eric Spoelstra can sit back and say, okay, I have a read on my team. We have A, B, and C. We need to fix X, Y, and Z. Some you can, some you can't because of the tax, because of the cap and things like that. But I think that he'd know who they are. And you know what, Clay? If you know who you are 3 weeks, a month into a season, it makes it a lot easier to handle those next 5 months.
I love how you put that, because and by the way, I know this show is so boring when we agree, but I'm going to have to agree with you on the 5, and it's for a variety of reasons. Like as I said, I feel okay going 2 and 3 even before, but given what they had to navigate, I thought that kind of upped it a little bit. I think it changed the curve a little bit with how you're grading them, and from the point about knowing who you are. I thought that Oklahoma City game was important for this reason. It's a bad offensive team, but it's a good and a scrappy defensive team. A lot of young guys and a team that's really gotten after some good teams. They started off terribly, but they started to bounce back a little bit and be a little more competitive. And so that's a team that if you're a professional team, like if you're a team with veterans, and this is something that last year and even the year before to a certain extent before the bubble, the Heat struggled in games against teams that they should handle. And what I like is that they've got this professional mindset. And I think they probably knew that finishing this road trip 2 and 3 would have looked a lot different and a lot better than finishing 1 and 4. The fact they were able to go out there and take care of business, I thought it was significant. And you come home now, and I think, look, we're going to talk more about the upcoming schedule. The Pelicans game, they're not going to look past it tonight. I'm going to. I think it's a win. It's one you got to kind of mark as a win. The Washington back-to-back I find really interesting. C. Dalla asks this, and it's something that I wanted to hit a little bit later. And Lil Mike 551 mentions this as well. Caleb Martin asks, is he a keeper or is he going back to the G League? I don't even know the mechanisms with the G League there. I think he's absolutely a keeper, and I think Borregales said this when he came over. He said, Caleb Martin is exactly what the Miami Heat go after. And he will bring everything that the Heat are all about. And I think we've seen that. To me, he's impressed me with a little bit with his athleticism. I didn't know he had that much athleticism. And also, he's a little more skilled than I even thought he was. And look, he's not going to, nobody's saying that he's going to all of a sudden like break into the starting rotation or even the top 8. But who he is he answers a lot of the questions that we had before the season, which is, beyond the 7 or 8 that you were really comfortable with this team in the rotation. He's somebody who's able, when you have injuries or when you're going to kind of give guys rest days, he can come in and give you significant minutes. So that's been my take on him so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. Eric Spoelstra obviously has shown a preference for 9-man rotation, hasn't had all 9 men to sort of do that. Perfect world. You have your starting lineup with Bam, with PJ Tucker, with Duncan Robinson, with Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler. We know the top 3 reserves, when healthy, are Tyler Hero, Markieff Morris, and Dwayne Dedmon. And I think we would both agree that Max Strus has earned regular rotation minutes. So you're talking about Caleb Martin as the 10th guy, and it's a little interesting. On a 2-way contract, you can be on the active roster, not even just playing, but on the active roster for only 50 of the 82 games. He's probably burned, I think, about 10 of those games already. So pretty soon you're going to reach critical mass and have to make a decision. Maybe it's as simple as the remaining money under the tax you give to him. You convert him from a 2-way contract when you have to a standard contract. Or you might see when Markieff Morris finally comes back, he won't be playing tonight against the Pelicans at FTX Arena. they sort of buy time a little with Caleb. They make him inactive. They say to themselves, you know what? Our core 9 is there. If you have to throw in a Casey Pallet, an emergency to give a foul or something, we can do that. And we sort of keep the extra minute, the extra games we need for Caleb Martin. I see a path for him similar to what we saw a couple of years ago with Chris Silva, where a two-way player made himself so essential the Heat had to find a way to convert him to a standard contract. I think that happened with Caleb Martin also. And again, it's a role that's hard for a lot of players. Don't play it all, play a big role. So all of a sudden, Jimmy gets hurt against the Lakers and Caleb Martin becomes a rotation player. He has that veteran mentality. We talked about this when they signed their two-way players. One, purely developmental, Marcus Garrett. He spent 4 games. He was in the G League, played very well for Sioux Falls, is back now dealing with a little bit of a wrist injury, but he's the long view kind of player. And then they said, you know what, if we're only carrying 14, and if you have a bunch of guys who really aren't contributors, we need a veteran type player. That's what Caleb Martin has been. In a perfect world, and this sort of denigrates him, and I don't mean to, Caleb Martin doesn't play because the 9 players I just listed probably have greater overall value to you. But you need plug and plays with the right attitude. That's what he's been to this point. So yeah, I think he works for them. I think any game you don't see Caleb Martin means they're a healthy team. They're in better shape, but he's not the kind of guy who's like, uh-oh, Markieff is hurt. What do we do now? Well, what you do now is you play Caleb Martin. He won't get in anyone's way. He'll do the little things. He'll let the scorer score, and he'll play defense. So maybe if a Jimmy or if a Kyle don't want to take an assignment or in foul trouble, he could step in. Or if a Duncan Robinson simply isn't up to a defensive challenge, you can play. And we've seen this even with Tyler Hero, offense, defense substitutions late in the game.
Yeah, and look, let's face it. You say, you're not trying to insult him by saying, in a perfect world he didn't play. But look, I mean, hey, 2021 is not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be perfect for any team. Thankfully, the Heat have not faced the significant COVID issues that a lot of teams have, but there is going to be, there's always attrition. But in 2021, 2022, the world we're in right now, there's going to be even more attrition just because of what we're dealing with. So he's vital. He's really important that you have somebody who can come in and fill that role. And later on, because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this, I want to talk about how Victor Oladipo coming back could potentially affect how you treat the Caleb Martin contract. Like if Oladipo, you feel really good about him, does it make you more likely? And again, not saying they're going to play the same spot, but when you're talking about the cap and all that, so we'll talk more about that later. But with Caleb Martin, I think it transitions us perfectly into the injuries that they're dealing with. And it's Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, and we'll learn more about their status for tonight coming up in a little bit. But, the thing that kind of struck me, and you were on the trip, so you can kind of give people, I think, a better idea of this. With Bam, it seems to be a swelling issue with the knee. And, it's look, I'm not going to pretend I'm not a doctor, but I'll play one here on Pallet Rack City because I've had knee issues. But when you get that consistent swelling, if it's something that you have to go out there and you have to play, you can drain it, you can shoot it up, you can go out there and function that night. I mean, you get the steroid shot and you can go out there and function. If this were the playoffs, if this were an important game, my read on this is you get it drained, you get it shot up, and you play. But you don't want to do that too many times. And so I
do that too many times, right?
Right. So you were on the trip. Kind of give people a little bit of insight on just how serious this is and how much this is more a matter of, look, we're not going to do this for a game in Oklahoma City in November at the risk of potentially hurting him later on in the season.
Yeah, it's a chronic kind of thing. He bumped knees, and as you said, that exacerbated the whole problem. He sat out that game in Memphis, which is way back now on October 30th. Every game he goes out there before the game and he works with Malik Allen. And he does his reverse layups and he works his way a little bit out to the perimeter. And they really monitor him. In the entire process, how do you feel? And they're dealing with the trainers. And at some point, if they have to cut it off, they cut it off. That's the decision they reached during the trip. He probably needs about a week off. And in this schedule, I just can't find you a week off. You maybe try to find a soft spot in the schedule. You maybe say to yourself, you know what? And we'll talk about this later. Coming up next week on the schedule, you have Detroit on Tuesday. Pretty bad team. You have Minnesota on Wednesday. pretty bad team. You have Thursday and Friday off, then you have a game in Chicago and Sunday off. Maybe they're even targeting and saying, okay, let's look at this stretch of schedule. Let's give him all the time he wants off, maybe even flying back home and get him out of the cold weather. We know how that can impact an injury or a problem like that also. But something interesting and concerning to me happened in the game in Oklahoma City. Omar Yurtseven showed he wasn't up to the moment.
Yeah.
He played 3 minutes, 33 seconds in his initial stint, coming in for Dwayne Dedmon, who started that game and played very well. And it would reach the point where Eric Spoelstra, I know the Thunder went small, but Spoelstra went small also. And this almost sounds condescending, so I'll let you work my way out of it when I'm done saying this. When you need Keziak Pallet to the rescue because Omar Yurtseven isn't good enough, that tells you Omar Yurtseven is a bit away. So many of my readers go back to Summer League when there was nothing else to watch on TV. And we saw Omer dominate in Sacramento and have his moments in the Las Vegas Summer League. Apples and oranges, two different things. That's my concern now. If Bam is out, you have one backup center because of this. I'm going to put this back on the old Clay Ferraro plate. Because when you look at Omar Yurtseven and Udonis Haslem and you saw what UD did or didn't do in the game against the Lakers,
yes,
all of a sudden that's a concern. Because you really don't have a backup power forward on this roster also. You can count Markieff Morris when he's healthy. So I think that's another thing about this misshapen roster, like I like to call it, is when Bam is out, let's say Clay Ferraro, you're a coach, you're a trainer, you stayed at Holiday Inn Express last night, and you tell him, hey, Bam has to miss another week. How are you working out your center rotation?
So I think it's going to be matchup based, and what I found interesting was, yeah, you're right. I mean, Yurtseven looked like he couldn't play. You couldn't have him on the floor against Oklahoma City, but he looked a lot different against the Lakers. And the Lakers were a team that were playing a little bigger. And I was surprised that he was able to stay in front of Anthony Davis a little bit. And I'm sure you got a lot of mentions from the people who've been all over you going back to the Summer League, but they were probably a little more quiet after the Oklahoma City game. But so to me, Ira, I wonder if it's matchup based. I wonder if it's, when you're going to be going up against a team like, and look, I would have to see what it looks like, and I'm not a scout, but like you mentioned Chicago. Vucevic is somebody who has destroyed the Heat in the past. And in many ways it's because he can take you outside, he can beat you inside. But is he somebody that maybe Yurtseven is able to stay in front of, like he did Anthony Davis, a little bit more than he could against Oklahoma City when you had these younger athletic? So I don't know, but that's going to be on the coach. So to answer your question about the center rotation, I think it's going to have to be matchup based. And this goes back to what you were saying about Bam as well. And if you're trying to find soft spots in the schedule, maybe it's less about how bad the team is, and maybe it's more about what the matchups are. And this is why Eric Spoelstra and that staff are paid a lot more than we are. But I will say this, knowing Bam Adebayo's personal thing against Karl Anthony Towns, and they're buddies. But the Kentucky thing, and there was that great article by Zach Lowe where somebody, I think it was a former coach, that was sitting there at dinner with Bam and Karl Anthony Towns, and somebody said to Bam, yeah, you're not going to be able to check him tomorrow night. And Bam was like that clenched fist meme that you see all the time. Like
from Arthur, yeah.
Like you're going to have a hard time keeping him out. So, I think with that, it's going to be, do you think that you can navigate certain games without Bam, and especially if there's swelling with that? So, all right, so let's put this to bed with the schedule and the week that was, and let's look ahead now because there's some really interesting games coming up. So let's talk about the schedule that's coming up, and we're also going to get to more of your questions and your comments right here on Inside the Paint.
Reach out to Ira and Clay. Drop them an email at insidethepaint@yahoo.com. Chime in on the YouTube chat board. You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines. If you're a Miami sports fan, then there's only one store to go to, and that's Caneswear at Miami Fanwear in Davie. They're your one-stop shop for all your inner Miami CF, Canes, Dolphins, Panthers, and Marlins merchandise. They have hats, t-shirts, game day jerseys, and so much more. Located at 2511 South University Drive in Davie, and open 24/7 online at caneswear.com or innermiamiwear.com. Call them at 954-835-5597. Caneswear, the spot where Inner Miami and all Miami sports fans shop.
When you're ready to purchase a new home loan or refinance the one you have, American Dream Lending will make sure your loan experience is easy with fast approvals and quick closings. With many loan programs and competitive rates, now is the time to turn your dreams into reality. Ask about special financing for veterans. They never charge an application fee and you will work directly with one of their experienced loan professionals. Stop dreaming and contact American Dream Lending today, 786-802-1727 or online at adreamlending.com. Welcome back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. Let's get back to the guys that just updated their email from Prodigy to AOL. Here's Ira and Clay.
Welcome back. I should give out that AOL email address just so people actually believe that we have AOL email addresses. Clay Ferraro, Ira Winderman once again. And you guys really drive this show. So keep dropping your comments, keep dropping your questions in the chat right here. And again, as always, please hit the like button. Ira, we got a game coming up tonight, Heat and the New Orleans Pelicans. And the Pelicans have been an unmitigated disaster. And it's something just feels so off there, and I don't know that it's as bad as when Anthony Davis wanted out, but there's something not right with the Zion Williamson situation. And you hear the rumors about him being really overweight in addition to the injury, and whatever it is, I think, Ira, you know this from covering the league for a long time. It's that when you have just a lot of stuff start to build up, it's not just one thing that leads a team astray. It's often, hey, one thing with your star player, and then questions about whether Brandon Ingram is a fit with that star player. And then you bring in a Jonas Valanciunas who's playing really, really well, and yet it doesn't seem like people are figuring out how to play with one another on that team. So, Ira, I don't want to just look past this game, but for a number of reasons, even if Bam can't go, and we're going to find out more on that in a little bit, even if Jimmy Butler can't go, and the fact that he was on the bench the other night kind of led me to believe that he's probably pretty close to playing again, you still should be able to win this game and in front of your home fans and coming home. And it's one of those that when you talk about a professional team, Ira, you got to go out and handle business like they did against Oklahoma City. You got to do that again tonight.
Yeah, I'm told that Jimmy will play tonight, so that's the good news. I don't know if they have to have Bam, but I think now that Dwayne Dedmon has a groin injury, I know they have to have one of the two, because I think Jonas Valanciunas is the kind of guy who can really school at Omar Yurtseven.
True.
And with his size, you can't go smaller. You can't play P.J. Tucker, for example, at center, plus Markieff Morris is still out, so you have that. Clay, I think there's an inherent problem with teams like New Orleans, like we just saw on Monday with Oklahoma City, and it's this. David Stern fought for some of these smaller markets. He wanted the moneyed owners. After Katrina, he wanted to make a vow that you will be in New Orleans as long as I can be around and a league can make it work. But then free agency changed the landscape of the league. It really became a free agency league, which means players had a choice of where they wanted to play and where they wanted to live. New Orleans is not getting free agents. Oklahoma City is not getting free agents. And it's really hard just to build your team on trades and the draft, which we've seen from the draft. It can be so hit and miss also. So I don't know if there's an answer for those type of teams. The NBA at one point thought there's nothing better than being the only show in town. Now, New Orleans, of course, you have the Saints. Oklahoma City, you don't. The league has teams in San Antonio, Salt Lake City, Sacramento. The feeling was, even if it's a smaller market, if we own the market, we're still in good shape. I don't think that works anymore. And you've seen it from the get-go. All we've heard is how Zion Williamson wants to be somewhere else. Of course, the New Yorkers have been pushing the Knicks idea forever, but the thought is that he wants more endorsements, more marketing. So I don't know how enthused he is to give his all and push through an injury for New Orleans, where maybe if he was in LA or Chicago or New York, it would be a little bit of a different approach. I think you're screwed if you're New Orleans. I think you're screwed if you're Oklahoma City. You can be Sam Presti in Oklahoma City and have a gazillion draft picks.
Don't get me going on that, Ira. Don't get me going on that.
Well, unless you hit on those picks with Durant, with Harden, and with Westbrook and make it work like they had their one shining moment there, played the Heat in the NBA Finals, it's really tough to make it work. So I think New Orleans is just a way station kind of team. Players get there, and then they want to get out of there. Players are drafted there, and then they want to get out of there. I think a lot of the Zion stuff, if he was with a team that he saw a future with, if he was with a team that he saw the marketing possibilities of being a face of a franchise, I think there'd be a lot different approach to how he approached the surgery, to how he dealt with management there. But I think he's just counting the years on his contract. Okay, become a restricted free agent this year. Okay, become a free agent this year, work my way out. This is Chris Paul all over again. This is Anthony Davis all over again. And this is what that franchise is going to have to sort of be. I think New Orleans is the kind of place where the entire goal has to be, can we make the playoffs and maybe win a round? Because I think they're sort of stuck there. The other point, and you mentioned this, Clay, at the top of the show here on Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint, is this. These are the craptastic losses that have crippled the Heat in the standings in recent years. The Orlando Magic, the Detroit Pistons, the losses that were unfathomable. Tonight is an unfathomable. Monday at Oklahoma City would have been an unfathomable. The East is competitive. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the upcoming schedule, when you have the Wizards and you have the Bulls coming up also. And you can be so close to first place in this conference and so close to the play-in that when you have your missteps, you and I will be talking on our shows through the year. Wow, Ira, that loss really crippled this team. I can't tell you how many times, Ira, over the last few years I've pointed specifically to Orlando losses, Brooklyn back when they were bad. I mean, and I can rattle off some of these that were just mine. Sacramento. You can't do that. And that's why we've already spent more time on New Orleans than I'd planned on. But you're exactly like, this is just, you can't analyze the Pelicans. What you have to analyze is, can the Heat go out there and just take care of business against the bad team so it doesn't bite them in the rear end at the end of the year like we've seen over and over again? And Ira, I've said from the beginning of this year, I don't care what seed the Heat finish with, as long as they're not 7 or 8. Correct. And in this case, I think now you're starting to look at this team and say, all right, they've navigated this really hard part of the schedule, and there's a path for them to get up to the top 2 at the end of the year, potentially. But that doesn't happen if you lose games to New Orleans, if you lose games to Oklahoma City. So this is where this team has to go out. And this game, it's such a cliche, but it's a lot more about the Heat than it is about the Pelicans. And Clay, the way I would phrase this is this: when I look at the Heat or any team, can the Heat beat any team in the Eastern Conference in a playoff series? I say yes. I say they've added enough after being swept by Milwaukee that they can compete with the Bucks. We'll see more in their upcoming games. Certainly, even last night when we saw the Nets play, obviously they're still without Kyrie. We don't know what's going on against the Warriors. They hardly look like world beaters. I don't think there's a team in the East that the Heat can't beat. The question has to be this: is there a team in the East that the Heat could lose to, that at the bottom that they can still find a way that they have a night. Well, Cleveland, I thought at the start of the season, the way Mobley was playing might be a tougher matchup than maybe some people expected. But you can't lose to Orlando or to Cleveland or to Detroit at the bottom, because probably otherwise, I mean, you can think of another team maybe that I'm missing. I think otherwise you probably have about 11 teams in this conference who are going to give you way more of a competitive game, being it the Charlottes or the Washingtons or the Chicagos or New Yorks or teams that maybe we didn't anticipate. So you can't let the certainties go away. The certainties to me in the East are Orlando, Cleveland, no offense to them, Detroit, and I think in the Western Conference, probably Sacramento, Minnesota, Oklahoma City. So you only get X amount of bite at the easy apple, and you have to make sure you don't choke on it.
Yeah, and a big thing with Cleveland, I've been impressed by what they've done, but I also think there's going to be some regression to the mean, and with Mobley out.
And
with
Sexton also, and Sexton injured also. Yeah, that impacts that also.
I mean, Rubio's been a revelation there, and yet I think we've seen over the years what happens. So tonight, it's all about the Heat. They got to go out there and do that. And by the way, I'm not going to go off on this. I could do an entire show on what Oklahoma City's doing. That when people praise Presti for hoarding draft picks, and yet it's like this shell game that never ends. And
what if the future never comes?
What
if they just keep getting picks and picks and picks, and all they do is trade the picks for more picks and picks and picks? So what you're doing is you're buying the future. You're selling some stock futures that you don't know where they're going to wind up. And maybe that's what you have to do in a city like that. Sell hope when you can't sell victory.
Exactly. Nobody wants to hear me rant on this for the next half hour. Anthony, good question here. Before the last two games, Duncan Robinson has been a ghost. I feel like he's easily replaceable for the role that he plays. Is there any trade value there? And I'm going to start this off, Ira. I think the thing with Duncan is when he gets going, I mean, there may be 2 or 3 shooters in the league who you fear more than him, if that. I mean, Steph Curry, we certainly saw what Steph did last night. I mean, he certainly won. What I do think, I've been watching the growth and the development of Max Strus for a while, because you're really boxed in right now with what you can do to improve the Heat roster, unless you trade one of those players who has a higher end contract. Duncan Robinson signed that contract. So if you're talking about down the road potentially, and you're looking at this team and a star becomes available, and another team sees the value in who Duncan can be when he's at his best, that's where the value could be. Is not just that he's an elite shooter, but also that contract-wise he would help out. So that's my read on his potential value.
Absolutely. You have to have movable money. And the Heat for a while have not had movable money. They've had either incredibly high end in the upper 20s and 30s, or else they've had these exception money or minimums where it's hard to aggregate and put a trade together. Duncan's right in that sweet spot, that $15 to $20 million area where you can get a player on a smaller contract, mix him with Duncan, and wind up getting a proven veteran. I agree. If Max Strus continues to improve, it does open that for you. But the gravity that Duncan provides, even before he was hitting shots, you could see the Lakers, you could see the Clippers, you could see the Nuggets still prioritizing them. He still makes the game easier for Bam, for Jimmy Butler, for Kyle Lowry, and is important in that regard. So I think there's 2 things there, and we'll get into Tyler later in the show also, is it's always interesting. Fans want to trade players when they're down, but that's not when they have the value. And yet when players are up and Duncan is hitting shots and Tyler is playing like an all-star, people don't want to do anything with them. Well, the way you make successful trades is you trade when value is high. You buy when value is low. And fans want it both ways. They want to get rid of Tyler. He can't play in the offseason. Now that he's playing great, how dare you think about trading Tyler for a Bradley Beal or someone like that? Same thing with Duncan. Until through last Friday, Duncan was a bum and had to be traded. Then starting on Saturday, man, Duncan is exactly what this team needs. That's what general managers have to do. As good as Tyler is now, as good as Duncan is now also the time to strike. And that is something I want to get into our last segment also is what's it like when a player is showing his best value? Do you say, okay, let's write it out? Or all of a sudden, the names that you and I spoke about in the offseason who might be available, is that when you sort of rethink it, including one who's visiting here at FTX Arena on Thursday night?
I want to get into the Wizards situation now. We'll talk about Tyler in the last segment of the show, because I have kind of somebody said this on Twitter almost as a joke, and I want to bring it back, but this is the teaser.
Sure.
Is Tyler Hero now the second best player from his draft class behind John Morant? Think about that. I think the Zion Williamson thing and the fact he's not able to get onto the floor, it starts to at least raise the question. We'll get to that in a little bit because I think it kind of leads into the Pelicans game tonight. With Washington, the thing I found really interesting in doing some of the research, and by research I mean just looking at their stats before the show started, it's Bradley Beal's scoring is way down this year, and yet they're winning. And something I've always felt about Bradley Beal is, and he's still the best player on that team. Spencer Dinwiddie's played really well too, but they've surrounded him with the really good role players that the Lakers no longer have. And I think they're, in addition to losing Caruso, I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing the Lakers take a step. And obviously, look, losing LeBron,
sure,
it's a problem. But when you put guys around Bradley Beal like Montrezl Harrell, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, I think, is somebody who he gave the Heat fits in the play. Kyle Kuzma, I think, had to get out of LA because he was not the player that fans wanted him to be when he was at his, a guy who was go out there and score a lot when they were bad. I don't think he's as bad or as useless, for lack of a better term, as I think fans in LA thought that he was towards the end. So you surrounded Bradley Beal with the type of role players that I think you need to surround somebody with. And no, he's not the guy who's going to go out there and be your number one on a really, really good team. But he can be the number one scorer on a team that can cause a lot of teams problems. And I think that's what you're seeing with Washington right now. And Ira, this back-to-back coming up, and you tell me if this makes sense. It kind of reminds me of when the Heat played Charlotte a couple of weeks ago. And Charlotte was that chic team that everybody was looking at, the darling of the moment. And because of what Washington's been able to do, and they deserve a lot of credit, but I think that he kind of have that circled right now as not just winning one game is going to be good enough. We want to show the world, hey, you guys are all on this Washington train. Sure. Don't forget what's going on down here.
Yeah, sort of slap them upside the head, put them in their place, and let them know what the true hierarchy is. I like the supporting players in Washington. I think what they did rounding out the roster was fine, except for this, Clay. There are very few one-star teams who get anywhere in this league. You need to round it out. Phoenix needed to bring in a Crowder and a Chris Paul to become a little bit more. Utah needed to add their depth. There was the Mike Conley edition. So when you're talking about, I'm going to put this back on you, okay? Who's the second best Washington Wizard after Bradley Beal?
Assuming he's healthy now. I've been a big Dinwiddie fan for a while. Now, okay, he's a high usage guy at his best, and so I think that can kind of be a problem paired with Beal. And yet I think you're seeing somebody who's going out there and he's healthy, and he at least takes some of the pressure off. But no, to your point, he's not a star. And even though Beal is a star, I think he's more a star in the mold of he's not going to be your alpha. He's not going to be the number one on a championship or even a top 2 or 3 team in the East. Right. So I'm not buying the Wizards as being a long-term even challenger in the Eastern Conference. I do like how they finally surrounded Beal with the type of role players that I think the Lakers underestimated the value of when you're trying to put together a championship team.
Right.
I love Russell Westbrook. I love what Russell Westbrook has done for the league. I love how exciting he was
but
as
not
a player. He's not a fit in LA. It took a while for him and Beal to figure out how to play together. When they finally did, Russ was gone. You need those sorts of role players who can go out there and are happy with the role that they play. And Ira, we're going to talk more about this on the other side. I feel like that's where the Heat have done the best job of filling out this roster right now.
Good point. Of role players. And one last thing, Clay, before you trade Tyler Hero in the next segment is this. Both the Heat and the Wizards will be playing back-to-back second nights when they play at FTX Arena on Thursday. The Heat are at least at home tonight against New Orleans. Washington is at Charlotte. So again, will we see the full teams? Will Bradley Beal get rested in one of these games? Again, these are those type of schedule games where you're playing chess and checkers and trying to figure out the best spot. So the truer Heat Wizards game may very well be the one at Capital One Arena on Saturday in Washington, more so than the FTX Arena on Thursday. So I think that'll be interesting.
So we're going to get into those games. Plus, is Tyler Hero the second best player out of his draft class, and why Ira wants to trade him? That's coming up next right here on Inside the Paint.
You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a good rack? Pallet Rack City. When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547.
Folks, you can support the hardest working sports talk show in South Florida through Cash App or Venmo. Just search Cash Big O Show. Support us through Cash App or Venmo. Cash Big O Show. We thank you for your incredible support. For over 16 years, EJDconstruction.com has provided South Florida residents quality craftsmanship, accurate project management, and exceptional service. That's why EJDconstruction.com is an A-rated member of Angie's List and the Better Business Bureau. When you're looking for the right custom home builder for additions or home remodeling, please call my friend Eric at 305-433-4843. That's 305-433-4843 for EJDconstruction.com.
If you're a Miami sports fan, then there's only one store to go to, and that's Caneswear at Miami Fanwear in Davie. They're your one-stop shop for all your inner Miami CF, Canes, Dolphins, Panthers, and Marlins merchandise. They have hats, t-shirts, game day jerseys, and so much more. Located at 2511 South University Drive in Davie, and open 24/7 online at caneswear.com or innermiamiwear.com. Call them at 954-835-5597. Caneswear, the spot where Inner Miami and all Miami sports fans shop.
When you're ready to purchase a new home loan or refinance the one you have, American Dream Lending will make sure your loan experience is easy with fast approvals and quick closings. With many loan programs and competitive rates, now is the time to turn your dreams into reality. Ask about special financing for veterans. They never charge an application fee, and you will work directly with one of their experienced loan professionals. Stop dreaming and contact American Dream Lending today. 786-802-1727 or online at adreamlending.com. If it's hardcore hoops you desire, make sure you subscribe to the Big O Radio Show and never miss an episode of Inside the Paint. Let's get back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro.
Back inside the paint. There we go.
Hey, Clay.
Backstage. So Ira, we teased this before the commercial break. It's Tyler Hero is somebody, and you mentioned this, that he's peak value right now. Like if you were to trade him, you're quote unquote selling high.
Yes.
And
I'm saying they're going to. I'm just saying that's how the market works.
Yeah, we don't want this thing aggregated, right? We don't want.
It's going to be anyway. So let's have fun with it.
Ira Winderman, Heat are trading Tyler Hero in order to sell high. No, so the thing I wanted to, before we get into the potential trade rumors, things like that, somebody mentioned this on Twitter, and it was kind of a joke, but it also got me thinking a little bit. So I'm just going to ask you that draft class right now that Tyler Hero was a part of, it's Ja Morant, Zion Williamson, Tyler Hero, and then a lot of players who I think have kind of been, I don't want to say disappointments, but you're not going to be able to pull out any stellar guys from that class. If I asked you right now, you could have either Zion Williamson with all the questions surrounding him, and I think a lot of them have been some of the same ones that you were concerned about coming in, the knee issues, things like that, versus Tyler Hero and what we've seen from him so far. And I'm talking about not a guy to build a team around, but I'm talking about for the Miami Heat as part of this franchise moving forward. If someone came to you, Ira Winderman, and said, I will trade you Zion Williamson for Tyler Hero straight up right now, what would you say?
I would say bring in every scout and every executive in our front office, because we have to give some thought to this. Because if we're the Miami Heat and we are who we think we are, and we are the team without basically any future first-round picks, and depending on how the tampering thing goes with Kyle Lowry, maybe no first-round picks, then I think you'd have to at least consider it based on your history of rehabilitating players, based on what people thought and still think that a Zion Williamson could be a second coming of a Charles Barkley in the right situation when motivated. I think that's a really interesting one, Clay. I was throwing out two names with Tyler Hero just because this is what we do on the road with free time. Would you trade Tyler Hero for Zion Williamson? I asked Big O yesterday on our Accurate Pembroke Pines report, and he was like, I don't think so. And I asked him about Bradley Beal. Obviously, the Heat are going to see Beal twice this week, depending on how the rotations work out for the teams. What would you do? Again, there was a point, if you could have traded, let's go back here, Clay, let's be honest with the listeners. In August, in July, if I would have asked you this question, I think the answers would have been from Clay Ferraro, yes and yes, on Zion and Bradley Beal for Tyler Hero?
Unquestioned.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now you're saying on a 1 month body of work, which has been a terrific body of work and even goes back to the preseason, you maybe are having second thoughts or rethinking it. That's what you can't do as an NBA executive, is you can't live too much in the moment. You have to say to yourself, if our team had a chance to make this move, would we? And here's the deal. When the Heat were trying to craft trades last season, and Tyler Hero was the centerpiece, if you believe the scuttlebutt, and even Pat Riley admitted this when he said with Duncan and Tyler, we wanted to hold on, we want to develop, we see something there, so we know their names were mentioned. I don't think there are a lot of other teams who are saying, if we trade a star, we need to get a star. Whether it was Ben Simmons, whether it was Damian Lillard, they said we have to get an elite guy who's at least been an all-star once. Mm-hmm. I think this could be the moment that it changes with Tyler. Now you can look at the makeup of the Heat roster and go, well, they're not that deep at shooting guard. They don't have that instant offense guy off the bench, but you're also taking the long view. So again, aggregators, do whatever you want with this.
This is opinion. This is opinion right now.
Would
so
I
let's
consider
be clear
trading Tyler for Zion Williamson? I at least think you would have to give it some thought. I probably would make it a package deal. I'd maybe would throw in Tyler Hero plus Will Manso for Zion Williamson and whoever is an ABC Sports anchor down in New Orleans and do it some way like that, because then I think Clay would go for the trade in a heartbeat. It's a tough one, but man, I do have to admit, watching Tyler Hero, he is so special in this role. So, Clay, how much do you, number one, value instant offense off the bench? Or number two, do you envision Tyler Hero being able to be your team's full-time shooting guard, a 10-year, 5-year player in that role? If you're convinced of that, that's when it gets a little different.
So I mentioned that I was looking at some of the numbers leading into the show today. And where's Tyler right now with his points per game? Is still around 21, 22?
About that, yeah.
Okay. Bradley Beal, with a lot more usage, is at 23 points a game. And look, we're not making a decision based on the first 10, 15 games of the season. Right. What it does make me wonder, though, Ira, is, okay, on a team where with Bradley Beal, they finally surrounded him with a good supporting cast and they're winning. Is he maybe not the guy that when he's not super high usage is going to be the volume scorer that we saw last year? And look, I'm not overreacting to it, but what I do want to look more at is, okay, given the way this current Heat roster is constructed, and given the way that Tyler Hero is able to come in off the bench and give you essentially what you would have to get from Beal with the starting unit in order to justify the deal.
Right.
And he would be handling, you'd have to give him more touches, more, there's only one ball to go around. So right. I just don't know that it would make a whole lot of sense when you combine that with what the salaries are and all that. And I'm trying not to be prisoner of the moment. I'm trying not to do the thing that you're talking about. And yet what I'm starting to wonder is if more this is a case where Beal can put up numbers when he is the guy and you're just giving him the ball and he's not going to be that. in Miami. And so I again, that's where the Zion Williamson thing.
Here's the other part of it that I would put to you. This Heat roster is a live in the moment roster.
Yes.
You're talking about Kyle Lowry at 35. You're talking about PJ Tucker at 36. You're talking about Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Dedmon and Markieff Morris all at 32. So if you make a Tyler Hero for Bradley Beal move, you're all in on the moment. If you make a Tyler Hero move for a Zion Williamson, you're saying, hey, if this guy's foot's really a problem and this guy's conditioning is really a problem, this might be another throwaway year. So 1 year of that Kyle Lowry contract is being written off. 1 year of Jimmy Butler with big money is being written off as he goes to 33. I think that's the other part of it also is, is it a priority enough for you, Clay Ferraro, to say the Heat have their present right now with Lowry and with Butler, but we need to build to the future? Or I think the Heat are more in on the moment. They're a year removed, actually only like 13 months removed from the NBA Finals in 2020. And I think that is a factor into it also. The other part of it is I think Tyler has grown into the Heat culture where we had concerns maybe as recently as last spring. And once you get a guy to buy in, we've seen this over the years, they stay in and they want to be with your team, or they want to be traded back to your team, or they realize it's never been better than when they were with your team. So maybe that's another investment point with Tyler Hero. He is doing all the right things on the court. He's doing all the right things off the court also.
Yeah, and I think with Zion is you would have to, you mentioned bringing out in all the executives and like having everybody figure out the scouts, and that's watching a player and how he plays, how he moves and all that. I want to know about the person. I want to know where are these issues coming from? And is this strictly a foot issue? Is this strictly an injury issue? And if that's the case, I'd need the medical info. I need to dig deep on that. And if it's something more than that, if it's something where there's a lack of motivation there, that's a red flag for me.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The player who I think I don't know if you told me this, but kind of the whispers around the Heat of like the whale that Pat Riley, and again, file this under whispers, don't aggregate this, but the whale that I think the Heat would love to bring in, and you've heard for a while, Joel Embiid. That there's and I think that they were watching that situation with Philly and what was going to happen. And Joel Embiid is somebody who, when you mention Heat culture and all that, like it always struck me how he gravitated towards Jimmy Butler. And Embiid always struck me as somebody who, like, he craves that sort of structure and like having somebody to coach him and tell him what he's doing wrong and like have a leader. Like Embiid, he strikes me as somebody who may not necessarily be the one who you want to be your leader, but he's going to follow the best leaders and like run through a wall for you. I'd want to know if Zion's going to do the same thing. Like, I want to know if he's somebody, it's just a bad situation for him. So if you're telling me that you're going to trade Tyler Hero, right? And again, we're not doing that. But if you're putting him on the trade block and you're saying, what's it going to take in return? I'm less convicted about Bradley Beal as I was a few months ago. It's not because he's doing, I mean, they're winning. I mean, so I'm not,
right.
But you see his numbers going down, and I don't know that his impact on the Heat would be any greater than the impact that Tyler Hero is making right now. I need to see more of a sample size. With somebody like Zion, you would have to figure out what's the there. What's the problem? Is it the medical? Is it the lack of motivation? Is it something more there?
Is
so,
it the,
like, in
is
addition
it the
to
body?
playing,
Is it the body type? Is it just not an NBA body? You know
right.
what used to be the NBA body type, whether it was a Corliss Williamson or a Charles Barkley, you're seeing it a little bit with a PJ Tucker, although not in a featured role, might simply not work in the way that the NBA is being played today also. And that's a factor. The kid has unbelievable athleticism, has unbelievable skills, but you've got to get it on the court also. Look, we've seen foot injuries with a Zydrunas Ilgauskas, a couple of very bad early years, and then a very long and productive career. We've seen foot injuries with the Sam Bowie, and that was it, and he was done. So it's just a matter of which direction you go in those.
Cidola says no to everybody you're talking about. And look, I think you're right, Ira, in that we're being prisoners of the moment. If we're absolutely, but I think we were also prisoners of the moment when Tyler was going the other way,
sure,
and when he wasn't, when you would be selling low. And so I think you have to figure out where that middle ground is. So
yes, and that's what Pat Riley and Andy Ellisberg and Adam Simon have to do is they have to be professional about it.
Right.
We can speculate. Fans can be fans. God bless you. You've earned that right. But at the end of the day, you have to look at both sides and find what the middle ground is with the player and who the player is, and also what the fit is, age-wise for where your team is right now, skill-wise for your team is right now. And Clay, you make a very good point. Tyler Hero has shown he is very comfortable as a sixth man. So as long as Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry are here with the first unit, you know you have that second unit covered. Bradley Beal would not be content with the sixth man. He's never been a sixth man. That's not his role. Well, sure as whatever word you want to use, Jimmy Butler isn't going to the bench. Kyle Lowry isn't going to the bench. So can you play the two of them and Bradley Beal together and send Duncan Robinson to the bench? Would you have the floor spacing you need? That's what a real executive thinks about, not just being as much prisoner of the moment.
Hawaiian Punch, thank you so much for the kind words, man. Really appreciate that. So, I wanted to get into like the whole week schedule, but I want to end on this and one last thing on Tyler. There was so much good stuff on the show today, so we didn't get into that part of it. But I want to end with this with Tyler. When you're talking about potentially trading him for a Bradley Beal, the one thing that I guess I had a little bit of a concern with this Heat team, and we haven't been able to see it play out yet because we haven't seen really a fully healthy Heat team in like a one possession late game where like you had to go to that one guy who was going to get the last shot. You had the game in Indiana and Tyler stepped up and but Kyle didn't play in that one. Is Bradley Beal a better option? Like, is he more of an ISO bucket getter type of guy? 10 seconds left in a game, you're down one. Is he that much better than Tyler Hero at doing that to where you could justify bringing him in to be that late game guy and you're not having to rely necessarily on a Jimmy Butler or a Kyle Lowry?
Well, one, I think Jimmy would still want to be the guy and still would be the featured guy because of his ability to get to the foul line, his ability to make free throws. So you might not need that guy in your optimal situations we saw during the run through to the NBA Finals in 2020. True. So you have that in play also. It'll really be interesting these next two games against Washington for us to get a better view up front of what Bradley Beal is. Bradley Beal's a talker, to see what he says about the teams and the games after. But more important than this, Clay, so it's not just a 1 week thing. If Washington stays where they are, Bradley Beal's going to be happy. Tommy Shepard, the GM's going to be happy. Nothing's going to happen. Bradley Beal will be maybe a Lillard type. I will ride it out with this team. I came here. I'm going to end here. And the whole thing is moot. Can Washington sustain this? We'll get a little better read on Thursday and Saturday. We'll have a much better read by midseason and before the February 10th trading deadline. And I don't hate to end the show by opening a new can of worms, but it's almost like what Damian Lillard's going through in Portland. Is that he could say he wants to stay all he wants, but if it still goes to crap in Portland, then February 10th, all of a sudden that date means a lot more around the league at the trading deadline. So we have to wait to get a little bit more of a sample size than just our Thanksgiving sample size. Certainly around Christmas, we'll know if there might be gifts under the tree in February.
That is how you end the show right there. Ira, thank you so much. It's going to be a great week coming up for the Heat. I think we're both on the same page. Tonight is important because you got to figure out, is this a Heat team?
Must win game.
Got to take care of business against those teams. And then the back-to-back games with Washington, is it time to show the rest of the league who's really the beast of the East? Not that anybody's thinking that Washington is, but if you kind of put them in their place a little bit, I think you feel a little bit better.
Slap them back to reality.
Hey, can we get like a GIF of that GIF of that of Ira just like slapping?
I'll just sit here. We'll be open all day.
Slapping me around. All right, guys, have a great day. We're going to catch you next week right here on Inside the Paint. The Big O Show rolls on next.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.